In 15 minutes, I will try to mention 4 different points. The first 3 will be very brief, so that I can allocate more time to the 4th topic that Amos, the director of the institute, also hinted at. The first point refers to a simple issue, which is the issue of time, the question of when to discuss what. When we talk about, in April and May, about a cutback of 3 to 4 billion shekels in the 2013 annual budget, it's a joke, because what the things that can be done, if they can be done, will harm exactly just the things that we don't want to harm. And you might recall that we discussed these same issues in 2006, when at the beginning of the year we discussed cutback in the security budget was decided on at that time. And the first thing that was done was to cut back on training, because that's the easiest thing to cut back on. So these are easy decisions to make, but most of them cannot be implemented, and those that can be implemented probably should not be. And Amos Harel mentioned, maybe sarcastically, but even if they do decide, the army will approach the prime minister a month or 2 later and explain their needs, and they'll end up getting the same and getting those funds. The security budget for the next 3 years is much more flexible. It can be debated. But changes can. But intelligence.
כמה הצבא יעיל או לא יעיל. והייתי אומר שבנקודה הראשונה אני חושב שהצבא, הכוח הלוחם של צה"ל הוא יעיל להפליא בהשוואה לכל קנה מידה בינלאומי מוכר, והדברים האלה נבחנו מספיק פעמים. תיקח כמה עולה בישראל להחזיק טייסת F-16, תיקח כמה לוקח להחזיק טייסת כזאת.
To finance the F-16 and in Israel, and how much it costs in other armies. In Israel, it is unusually inexpensive. The Israeli army has excellent abilities that, especially considering the budgets, that would be almost impossible to comprehend. This is a result of an ongoing efforts to be more and more to streamline as much as possible. And I think that the IDF is an efficient learning system, and compared to other public institutions in Israel, it not only evaluates itself regularly, but every 5 years it stops for a minute and evaluates everything that it does, including pricing from top to bottom. How much does it cost me to finance a reserves unit and a permanent unit? I think it evaluates itself very thoroughly, and in my opinion, the Army is an organization that tries to streamline, and I think it is successful. And that brings me to a third point where I think there is quite a bit to do. The Army, like any large organization, like any organization that has existed for many years, it's an organization that works based on assumptions that are implicit, that although they are evaluated, the price of working according to following those assumptions are sometimes too high. I'm not referring only to the Army. We're talking about the Army and the Ministry of Defense and the link between the two. They function based on assumptions that should be analyzed in depth, and these are not bottom-up, these are top-down. We have to evaluate the necessity of the value of these assumptions. The structure of regiments in the IDF is similar to most other armies, which is the same as the structure as divisions in most of the world for the past 60 or 70 years. They're similar because they're based on two similar foundations. They're based on hierarchy, and there's very narrow leadership. Each commander is responsible for 2 or 3 units. There is a full chain of command. If you evaluate the command in the IDF, you'll see that their structure is very similar. They took the justified structure of divisions, which exists in all organizations, regardless of whether they're related to military or not. Even if a sub-organization that justifies having a commander that is divided into 5 different fields, and each one has to be headed by a lieutenant colonel. No one can say that it requires a brigade general, or that 3 colonels are necessary in between. And if we evaluate the outcomes, we can ask difficult questions. If we consider the intelligence corps in the north, if we look at the structure at the command, how many officers there were and how many senior officers there were from lieutenant colonel and up, and you'll see that there is a huge increase in numbers that is unproportional to the number of forces that they command. Another example, in brief, is an organization that develops the military industry. If you compare the client with the industry that actually develops the product and manufactures it, there are 4 mediators. Are all 4 mediators actually really necessary? Each of them are commands with many colonels and each of them are industry experts. Is that justified? In my opinion, it is not. So, in my opinion, the IDF has to evaluate its structure from top down. It has to reassess the assumptions upon which the structure was based. These can make significant changes in the expenses in the military expenses, not now, but in the coming years. And this brings us to the last point, which I think is the most important. Recently, we hear quite often. You hear politicians saying, why do you need so many tanks and why do we need so many aircraft? So these are good questions, but the real way to evaluate what is necessary and what is not is and not presented as a general question that is very hard to answer, are the answer that I present based on the work that we did here at the Institute. I think that the real dialogue that should be held between the army and the politicians is as follows. The power of the IDF cannot be measured by the number of tanks and the number of aircrafts. It has to be measured by yield. The ability to protect borders, to prevent activity against Israel, to protect Israel's skies, the ability to conduct activity that is important. We have to define a minimal standard of security that is not undebatable. We have to define that level costs a certain amount of money, and then we can say that there are additional 14 things that we would like to do, and each activity provides a solution for a different security solution. And to make it simple, we would say that each activity would cost, for example, 2 million shekels. So the government has to convene and say, do we want to settle for the minimum standard, which is a legitimate decision, and then our security budget would be a certain sum, a certain figure, and in addition, we would like to add an additional 4 or 5 components that we think are crucial. And if we decide it's 4, 5, 6, or 7, we have to decide which one we'll choose. And I would like to give several examples. Popular topic recently is the Iron Dome. Within the standard that I define, we have the 5 existing batteries that can protect a certain area, specifically the cities in the south. If they're in the south, they can't protect the north. So if we decide to settle for that, then we know that we have a short blanket. If you have an incident in Gaza, then we have a solution there. But if there's an incident from Lebanon, then we'll have to move the Iron Dome. If we want to double the number of batteries so that we can be protected on both fronts, then we have to double the budget. But you have to understand that this is the relationship between yield and budget. And others say there won't be large wars, or we don't expect war with, there won't be war with Egypt. So why do we have to maintain certain capabilities? The question isn't will there be or will there not be. The question is, do we define within that Israel, do we want to have the military capability in the sea, air, and on the land to face the Egyptian army if in the next 5 years there will be a war? Yes or no? If the assessment is that it won't be necessary, and as a result we decide not to incorporate one of these 14 issues, is it necessary to attack a target as far as Iran? And if we say, for instance, that it costs 2 billion shekels, that maintaining this ability costs 2 million shekels, for example, and if we say that this issue, we're not really going to attack Iran, it's not necessary, it's not a necessity, we can live without it. Let's save that those 2 billion shekels, but it cannot be it cannot be a few hours within the comprehensive discussions about the national budget. The real discussion is what to incorporate in the budget and what not. We have to consider what we want to include in the security budget and what we can live without. And if this does not, if it doesn't work this way, it's very easy to spew slogans of what's necessary and what's not, and we avoid the real question of what solution you want to present. And the final point, based on to continue what Amos said, is that the army might buy very expensive toys that they don't necessarily need, and they might need other equipment. Where we can always argue with the outcomes, but an army that makes the decisions regarding what it decides to purchase, which projects it invests in, it does so in a very systemic and organized procedures. So at the end of the process, the Chief of General Staff is presented with all of the necessary equipment, and they really agree that the budget will be the budget is approximately 100, and the actual budget will allow only 30. And the Chief of General Staff will have to decide what can be incorporated, what will be incorporated, and what will not, and what will be completely incorporated, and what partially. And this is a necessary process. I know that there is no other public organization that deals with these questions to this extent. In